Let's get on to the substance of the day, which is this great theme of forgiveness, and which we all need. And like Stephen Cherry, and Stephen, thank you so much for being with us. It's a great book, and I was really keen for colleagues to engage with it, and it's a huge bonus that you're actually able to be with us today, so we can hear from you about how you came to write about the book and engage with you on it. Like Stephen, and probably like most of us, our business is forgiveness, and I've found myself keeping a record of some of the stories of forgiveness that I've come across over the years, and it's now quite a big file on my computer, and I looked at it last night, and actually the two first stories on it are quite pertinent, really, because you sort of wrestle with this tension. "I don't want to see the man put to death," said John Staines, who was the elder brother of Graham Staines, who was murdered by a Hindu extremist, Dara Singh, in India. I think this was 2006. And John Staines, the deceased brother, Graham was the person who was killed by this extremist, was pleading for clemency for the murderer. He said he has to answer to God for what he did, but he says he committed a terrible crime, but the sort of thing that Jesus Christ espoused was that if we can't forgive our fellow men, then how can God forgive us? So that sort of instinctive Christian instinct for forgiveness. But the next story, title in the Times newspaper, I think it was, or no, this was the Church Times, "Bishop praises priest who quits, unable to forgive." I don't know whether you remember this. This was Julie Nicholson, a priest in the Bristol Diocese, whose daughter, Jenny, 21, a wonderful woman, a talented musician, was killed at the bomb in Edgware Road station by Mohammed Siddiqui Khan. And Julie, her mother, and the priest said, "All my understanding of what it means to be a priest is tied up with peace, reconciliation, and forgiveness. It's very difficult for me to stand behind an altar and lead people in words of peace and forgiveness when I feel very far from that. I rage that a human being could choose to take another human being's life. I rage that someone should do this in the name of a God. I find that utterly offensive." On the one hand, that immediate Christian instinct for forgiveness, and on the other hand, that honest, authentic recognition that forgiveness is a jolly hard thing to do, and it doesn't just happen. And Stephen's book, in many ways, sort of works with that tension, our sort of mandate to forgive, and yet he works in a deeply human, realistic, and I think authentically Christian way to work out what forgiveness means, particularly emphasizing its long and somewhat tortuous story, I suppose. So, Stephen, thank you very much for your book. Since coming, of course, to Coventry, I've been very interested as well in the sort of in the Coventry story, which is so much bound up with forgiveness, and struck by some of the parallels that you draw in your book, particularly with Gordon Wilson, who that wonderful Christian man whose daughter Marie, I think, was killed at Enniskillen in 1987, and he's become a sort of symbol of the Christian instinct for forgiveness. And Stephen, probably makes quite a lot of that story, but really does sort of get into the details of it, and notes that actually Gordon Wilson didn't immediately say, "I forgive." He just said, "I'm not going to be bound by hatred," and that struck me as rather similar to Provost Howard in 1940, who said somehow we're going to break out of the circle of revenge. This is not the way for human beings to live, and somehow we've got to sort of break out of that. And of course, he did talk about forgiveness, but I think that the immediate instinct was actually we just got to find a way out of the cycle of violence and the immediate instinct for revenge. And then that sort of opened up a whole sort of space in which, all sorts of things could happen. And eventually the cathedral's ministry of reconciliation could begin to fill it as they tried to work out, like Gordon Wilson did, the implications of that sort of immediate instinct. And where I thought, Stephen, there was another very interesting parallel was the way you talk about, if I understand you right, what God is really about and calling us to be as forgiving people. And you even allude to being forgiving communities. And as Richard Cook mentions in his very fine blog on your book, very, very interesting that Provost Howard in 1914 responded in the way he did, but it didn't sort of come out of nothing. Indeed, just a few days before, I suppose, the cathedral was praying for reconciliation between Germany and Britain even then, even before the bombing. So that reaction that came at the bombing was coming from, I think it's a good example of a forgiving heart, a forgiving community. Very interesting. And yet Coventry has also had to learn that sort of real forgiveness and the reconciliation that might come out of it is, as you describe, a slow, deep, enigmatic, unpredictable, vulnerable process as you sort of grow into it. I'm very interested in how communities do that, as well as how people do that, and indeed how nations do it. And I'm interested actually in whether there's still work to do between Britain and Germany, particularly in relation to the area bombing of the German cities, some of which are about to be celebrated or commemorated in terms of the 70th anniversary. Stephen talks quite a lot about empathy as well, which I thought was, again, an interesting parallel, the trying to sort of begin to see things from the perpetrator's point of view. And I think Provost Howard was able to do that in an instinctive sort of way. And again, he had to sort of grow into that. And it would be very interesting to hear you comment later on the on his use of Father Forgive. I call that the Coventry Confession of Complicity. That actually it's a recognition, in a sense, of original sin, that we're all bound up with each other's sins. And I think there was something there about empathy. Actually, we empathize with the other person, with the other nation in this case, and the awful conditions that they found themselves in. And in a sense, we're all bound up in a common responsibility. So, as you can see, your book gave me a lot to think about, not just in sort of terms of my own attitudes of forgiveness and individual ministry in relation to helping to shape people and communities into forgiving beings, but also how it relates to the whole Coventry story. And this might be a chance to say that, we went through this little process of should we change the logo? And we decided, actually, no, we shouldn't change the logo. But what we might, the diocesan logo with the, with the cross of nails on it and so on. But what Bishops' Council did say is that it would be that logo can be accompanied by the words Diocese of Coventry, but some also, and I think Graham Pringle pointed us the way, McDonald's sort of have different sort of strap lines. But we're saying that actually we can have a number of strap lines. One of them is Coventry Diocese reconciling people. Because we're wanting the diocese to own the identity, in a sense, that the cathedral has given to the whole diocese. Wherever I travel, as Bishop of Coventry, as the diocese, representing the Diocese of Coventry, like it or not, I'm immediately associated with the ministry of reconciliation. So I don't think it's something that the diocese can sort of avoid, even if it wants to. It has a particular concentration in the cathedral, but the cathedral, of course, is the mother church of the diocese. Therefore, it involves us all. So it's a very interesting question for us, Stephen. What does it mean to have that association with reconciliation? And might we be, and I like this way of sort of expressing it, reconciling people? Might that be what we're about, in the sense of we are people who seek to reconcile others, and we want to be a reconciling community that helps people to be deeper reconciled to God and to each other and to the enemy. Yeah.